This episode contains depictions of harassment, racism, hate symbols, and hateful language. Please watch with care.
From 2018 to 2022, the number of reported hate crimes nearly doubled across Canada. Why are these crimes on the rise? These researchers will tell you, it's not a small question. A full answer might need us to go way back in time. But looking at our political environment now shows us that political rhetoric goes a long way towards normalizing a climate of hate.
But all over the world, they're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia. The crime is going to be tremendous.
We're seeing more narratives in the public sphere that seem to lend this permission to hate, that people seem to think it's okay to express those sentiments.
Welcome to Canada. He's not from around these towns. I can tell by his face.
I told him he was a racist. He said, yeah, so what? Go Trump.
We're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals.
These are not benign sentiments, and it's well documented that the use of hate speech leads to actual violence.
Get the fuck back inside if you want to fucking start something. I'm fucking serious. Call your fucking Taliban friends because we got them too.
You ramp up the number of people who are hearing and talking in a hateful manner, and the percentage of one of those people actually doing something about it also increases, right?
Take your fucking face, you fucking piece of shit.
And so people of color and communities of color are increasingly uneasy with what they wear, how they talk, their culture being a debate point on the world stage. There are kind of unspoken or unmeasurable harms that also happen as a lot of this stuff is mainstreamed. At an everyday level, I think it also has a negative impact, which is much more hard to quantify.
Some people to bring down. Let's rise up and take back our Canada.
One of the ways that politicians or influencers use coded language to speak to their base and other like-minded people is through something called dog whistling.
Saying, "Make Canada great again." This is too funny.
That's intentionally using language that may appear innocent to some, but carries a hidden message for those who understand its meaning.
People resonate with this kind of sentiment.
This weekend we take our country back, Patriots. Patriots! Like, is this setting in for you?
You might have heard some of these slogans. Expressions like, take back Canada, or taking care of our own, often employ vague words with the power to sway.
When people reach a certain level, they'll dog whistle to us. Doug Ford said, we got to take care of our own before we take care of anybody else. And just that sentence alone, every nationalist out there, like, we know what you're saying, Dougie.
And sometimes the language is less coded.
But he did say the Muslim veil came from an anti-women culture.
And frankly is rooted in a culture that is anti-women.
Let's stay in 2015 for a moment, because the context here matters. There was a federal election campaign underway, and it was about to impact race relations in the country in an important way.
A re-elected Conservative government will also commit to establishing an RCMP tip line so that citizens and victims can call with information about incidents
of
barbaric
Cultural Practices Hotline, which the federal Conservatives pitched during the 2015 election campaign, built upon their Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. The legislation was meant to, quote, protect women and girls from forced marriage and other barbaric practices.
Which made illegal things that are already illegal, like killing someone because they marry outside the family's wishes, or forcing someone into an illegal marriage. All of these things were already illegal.
This was an anti-immigration, anti-Muslim platform, couched in the language of Barbaric Cultural Practices Hotline.
In the end, the hotline idea failed, but
these are racially coded things that they're not just picking out of nowhere, but they're speaking to a base. There is a receptive audience there.
Those people are here to install Sharia in Canada and in Quebec. We're the ones being called extremists. But all we want is to keep living in the world we were born in.
Political rhetoric reflects to some degree the sentiment that at least a section of the public hold,
including far-right groups, which were spiking across the country.
Au Québec, plusieurs centaines d'activistes d'extrême droite ont organisé dimanche une manifestation pour protester contre la politique migratoire au Canada.
Even though the federal Conservatives lost the 2015 election, their time in power stoked a lot of Islamophobia.
Looking back to 2015, the Canadian Muslim community bore the brunt of sinister political rhetoric surrounding the federal election, which painted Muslims as terrorists or terrorist sympathizers, as well as being anti-woman.
I think it's very difficult now to tease out what's extreme when we're seeing these kinds of discourses and narratives being expressed by politicians.
The Islamophobia they stoked continued to fuel policy battles, especially in Quebec.
Quebec's government tabled legislation today to ban public service workers from wearing religious symbols on the job.
Pour les uns, le projet de loi ne va pas assez loin, ne donnera pas de résultats. Pour les autres, le projet de loi est carrément raciste.
It proved instantly divisive.
Le sondage il y a 2 semaines où plus de 87% des Québécois se disent en accord avec le principe de la neutralité religieuse de l'État.
Why do you think the vast majority of Quebecers are for this law?
I think that Quebecers in general have a problem with religion. We always have to pay the price for this.
So if any kind of politician or any kind of discourse is scapegoating another group of individuals, I always say like that's usually a call, or it should be like a red flag for us to say, okay, something is going on here. If there's an entire group of people that are being excluded.
And then, one of the deadliest mass shootings in Canadian history.
The shots rang out during the sacred evening prayers at the Quebec Islamic Cultural Center with 50 worshippers inside. One witness telling ABC...
Alexandre Bissonnette had a history of consuming anti-immigration, Islamophobic, and far-right materials online. On the evening of January 29th, 2017, he read the news of Trudeau welcoming more refugees and decided to take matters into his own hands. By approximately 7:55 p.m., he'd begun his rampage. Despite widespread condemnation of the attack, the conversation about religious symbols would only deepen. In 2019, the province officially passed the controversial Law 21. This was the second attempt to pass the secularization bill.
Bill 21 is about secularism. That's it, that's all.
The legislation prohibits the wearing of religious symbols, including kippas, hijabs, and turbans, while providing public services.
Je suis québécoise musulmane, je porte le voile.
For this young teacher and others in her position, an unthinkable policy.
C'est comme si tu me disais d'enlever quelque chose de moi.
But the government stood firm.
Well, we don't believe it is discrimination. I think it's important to really confirm the secular nature of the state. It's always critical in a democracy to balance individual rights from collective rights, and we think that with this piece of legislation, we've struck the perfect balance.
Backed by popular support in the province.
But here in Quebec, 66% of respondents are in favor of the religious symbols ban.
In 2022, the Association of Canadian Studies published an extensive survey revealing the harmful impacts of the law on religious minorities.
Islamophobia is a heavy word in today's discourse, but it is heaviest for those who are on the receiving end of it.
2/3 of Muslim women and Sikh men in the province said they have been a target or witness of a hate crime.
In a time of overwhelming stigma, I fear being othered, profiled, and killed.
Even though Muslim communities have been raising for decades that the white supremacist violence is really a source of threat to them and their safety, there was a great deal of reluctance treating them as a national security problem or a problem of extremism.
Next time on Unravelled.
If you think about the Quebec Mosque attacker, if you think about the London, Ontario attacker, they weren't part of any organizations. A lot of these guys are consuming content online or in person with a whole host of organizations, but they're never actually joining anything.
This is what researchers call atomization. And in a heated political climate, it's becoming one of their biggest concerns.